What's going on, Yins? How's everybody doing out there? Welcome to this week's episode of the HUMANIMAL podcast. Been a while since we got the podcast up and rolling, probably since like July, huh?
Yeah, something like that.
Been a little while, but we got a lot going on production-wise, but you know, that's all about to change because I guess it is every white-tailed deer hunter's favorite time of year right now, which is, of course, the whitetail rut.
Sweet November is here.
That's right, sweet November, coming hot off of Halloween yesterday, my favorite day to be in a tree stand. And we're going to be doing things a little bit differently here with the HUMANIMAL podcast over the next couple of days. If you guys have checked us out on the HUMANIMAL Instagram or seen any of the stuff that we put out there on social media, you already know this, but for those of you that haven't seen that, we are going to be talking basically nothing but the rut. For the next couple of days. So we put it out on social media that we want to talk to people that are out there in the field all day, every day. We want to talk to you about your area, what's happening with the rut. Doesn't matter what state you live in. If you're out there in the field chasing them down or watching them chase one or the other, we want to talk to you. So hit us up through our social media accounts over on Instagram or Facebook or whatever the other computerized world might have for us out there.
Go ahead, do it like right now. Get off the hit pause, go do it. Write us right now. We need some more people. We've got a lot in the hopper, but, I mean, the more the merrier.
Yeah, and really I think, the idea, we're going to keep these podcasts short and sweet, and we're going to talk about the rut. We're going to reach out to a bunch of different people and shoot the bull to see what's happening in different parts of the country. So call it a rut update, rut tracker, rut report, rut wrapping the rut. I don't care what you want to call it.
The shag story. Whatever you want.
Yeah, the shag story, literally. Whatever you want to call it. So, and we're going to be running this, I don't know, I think we plan on the next 5, 6, 7 days. And
yeah.
Who knows? Maybe we go longer. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, it is here. The rut is finally here. So like I said, doing things a little bit differently on these next upcoming episodes, but I think it's going to be a good time. So a couple of things I got to get out of the way before we dive into this. I just want to talk about some of our partners right now. So this episode of the HUMANIMAL podcast is being brought to you by Oz Ozone Generators. So if you guys are familiar with Oz, they're ozone generators that are made by ScentLock Technologies. They are some of the best ozone and most versatile ozone generators available, so check them out. Go to scentlock.com and search around for.
And right now, there's a lot of scents in the woods. You know what I mean?
100%.
So there's a lot. I mean, you and I hung a stand yesterday, and you know it's hard when you're hanging a stand to keep all your scent off the ground below the tree. And we had it happen last night. We didn't get busted or nothing. We did a really good job with our ground scent. But I mean, anything you can do to minimize that is good.
Well, 100%. I mean, think about this. Right now, every buck that roams the woods, his sniffer is on high alert 24/7.
On point.
Yep, it is on high alert. If it's ever on high alert, it is right now because he's smelling for that sweet smell in November. So yeah, check out the ozone products over at ScentLock's website. We've also got today's podcast being brought to you by Banks Outdoors. So if you guys aren't familiar with Banks, you should be, because they make, hands down, the best line of blinds, feeders, watering systems, and accessories that are out there on the market. I really wish we had a Banks in the spot that we're hunting right now, because it is pouring down rain with like a 35-mile-an-hour wind, which is why we're sitting here recording this podcast, and we're not in the stand. So great people, great company, phenomenal products. Banks Outdoors. Head over to banksoutdoors.com. Check out their line of products. They got a little bit of something for everybody. And then lastly, this episode is brought to you by Reconyx. See what you've been missing with Reconyx trail cameras. So if you guys know much about Reconyx, you know, they are the benchmark of reliability and performance when it comes to trail cameras out there. Whether you're running a Hyperfire 2 or the Ultrafire series, I mean, there's just nothing better.
Yeah.
So
I agree.
Long time partner of ours as well. So check out those guys at Reconyx.com. Really, if you think about it, those three partners, that's like everything you need.
Yeah.
To hunt the
right
rut.
Now. Yep.
So, you know, you got a good blind in Banks, and you're tucked in. You got intel from the Reconyx, and you got your scent game under control. Man, you're dialed, ready to be successful. So now that we're through the partner read, let's get on to the good stuff, the state of the rut. So this episode, AB and I are going to run through just the rut in general. I think, you know, rather than, we can dive into a little bit of where we think it is here in Ohio, but I would say let's just run through the rut in general and kind of break it down in terms of how you see the rut, how I see the rut.
Yep.
I mean, everybody's got a different opinion on this stuff,
For
right?
sure.
And I'm sure a lot of people out there are going to chastise me or you for what we think. But, hey, listen.
Well,
it's the way of the world.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Like, it's very regional. So, last week when I was in Michigan hunting my butt off, the rut for me on my farm in that little section was going like crazy.
Like full bore.
Yeah. My top 3 shooters I saw every day, every set, and I had an opportunity at one and screwed that up. But, that was happening. But then like an hour away from me in Michigan, there's guys that, no chasing, no seeking, no nothing.
Right.
So it's very regional. But that's why we wanted to do this. We want to get guys on from Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Ohio, and just if you're, in that region, you can kind of take that and retain it and, use it however you will.
Sure.
So
put it to use. I mean, I think you for the rut you had last week. I mean, you physically watched one of your shooters breed a doe three times in the early 20-something of October.
Yeah, it was. I got to remember the date, like the 24th or 25th. I can't remember the date now, but yeah, I watched. He's a pretty big 8. I mean, for that area, he's probably 120, 125 inch 8, 3-year-old. I watched him for over 30 hours in a bean field locked down with a doe, and I sat on him all day with him at 300 yards, and I watched him breed her 3 times in 4.5 hours.
Right.
And it was like, so, and I've only seen that once ever. I mean, how much have we been in the woods the last, 10 years,
right.
and I've only seen it once, and now I see it 3 times in one day, so it's pretty crazy.
Well, let's get it out there. Let's talk details and phases.
Yep.
I think of the rut. You got pre-rut, you got pre-rut, you got rut, you got post-rut, you got post-rut, you got mini-rut, you got late rut, you got early rut. I mean, holy man, there's a lot of rut activity out there. So, rather than phases, stages of the rut, I mean, it's all the rut. Let's be honest. It's all part of the breeding cycle of a whitetail.
They're not thinking with their heads.
Yeah. They're
matter.
Crazy, and they got one thing on their mind.
Right.
So it's, let's start with the early on, just rattle through these quickly.
Yep.
Kind of how we look at things, or at least how I look at things, and then, kick over if you think I'm right or wrong. For me, it all starts, the rut really truly begins, in my opinion, when they start to change their patterns. Like, to me, that's the first giveaway, or the first inclination of like, okay, things are about to change. And there's lots of different things that can change a deer's pattern, from, the crops being cut. I mean, there's all kinds of, we're not going to dive into the nitty gritty of that. But to me, that's the first major shift that occurs that starts to put them in that mindset of like, okay, cool, summer's over, it's getting down to business now. So in that October time frame, that's where I first start paying attention, and I think really what that does in the early stages is that starts to set the scene for, okay, I've been doing this for months on end, and this has been my life and my world. But now I got to change that, and now I as a whitetail got to start to map out my surroundings. I got to start to map out my zone. I don't think in the summertime they care much more about anything than just getting up and going to feed,
packing on a belly.
Like, life is good, right?
Yep.
They're packing on the pounds because they know what's about to happen. So to me, that's like the first thing that triggers in my head. Okay, now we need to start paying attention to, what's going to happen over the upcoming, week or two, and where these deer start to go, because all of that folds into that first week in November when you're sitting there scratching your head and you say, where could he be? Well, if you've been paying attention, you might have a good idea,
For sure.
So that kind of kicks things off for me, and then from there it goes into, like I said, I gotta lay out my map, and I'm speaking like I'm a deer. I got to lay out my map, and I got to figure out what my turf is. I need to start roaming around,
honing in on where those does are yarding up.
That's
too,
right. That's right. Yeah, they're looking for, okay, what quick hit food sources do I have, in this area that I'm living in? Where are these does bedding? And not only that, but who the hell else is around here?
Right.
Who has moved in here? Who has moved out of here? And what is my kind of level of dominance? How confident do I feel roaming around, this section that I'm living in my core area? So to me, that's kind of like phase number 2. And during that phase is when you start to see, the rubs get aggressive. You start to see the scrapes show up. You start to see all these kinds of signs that, like, all right, they're really prepping in preparation and gearing up for, really a 2 to 3 week span of just mass
Nonsense.
craziness.
Yep.
And I think they do it nonstop that, during those early phases. Call it, the generally speaking, November 15th through the 25th, or November 10th through the 25th somewhere, or excuse me, October. Yeah,
yep.
October. Somewhere in there, because come the actual rut where they are seeking, chasing, doing all that stuff, they don't have time to pay attention to anything else,
Their guard is down completely.
Their guard's down. They got one thing on their mind: find a doe, find a doe, find a doe.
And the only way you screw that, I mean, not the only way, but the big way you screw that up is you screw the doe up.
Yep.
I mean, she's going to know.
Yep.
She's on high alert for everything. I mean, her head's got to be on a swivel.
That's right.
Who's around her, what's going on, what smells are going on. So,
and that all kind of leads into, again, if you've been paying attention to what your deer have been doing, and the signposts and the markers and everything else, the strategies for hunting can change with the tides, right? They can switch, or they should anyway. They should switch with the ebbs and flows of the rut. What once might have been an unbelievably hot and active scrape line might all of a sudden go dead, and you need to be prepared for that, because you're wasting your time if you're still sitting it a lot of times. Or you got a little family group of 4 or 5 mature does and fawns, and it's like, all right, well, I'm just going to hunt the does for the next 2 weeks, because if I hunt the does, he will show. Right?
Yep. And that's not a bad move at all. I mean, that's a good move.
Right. So we go out of the signposting and we get into now, what I consider that search phase, or some people call it the seeking phase, where, the bucks are now actively on their feet. They know their turf. They know the quick hit food sources they have. They know their boundaries. They know their enemies. They know their friends. They know their does. And now it becomes, I'm going to troll around this area and I'm going to start looking, because inevitably every single year, it doesn't matter. You are going to have a doe come in early, 2 does come in early. You never know, right?
And usually that time, I'm going to add something. Usually that time, this is when the bigger deer of the area are going to seek out that first hot doe.
Yep.
That's when the bigger deer, and I think that's what I found out in Michigan last week, is the 3 bigger deer in my area, sought out the first hot doe, and they weren't going to leave them.
Yep.
I think that's what's going to happen this time.
Well, and they've been on this earth a lot longer than the young deer, right? So they're no dummies. They've seen it happen. They've witnessed it happen. They've smelled it in the air. They know what that means, and they know that those first doe or 2 might come in a little bit earlier than everybody else. So they're on the lookout for it. They're up on their feet and they're on the lookout. And really during this phase where they're just kind of out, trolling and seeking and just seeing what they can find, a lot of times when they do find a doe that comes in early, and believe me, they will find her. This is one of the things that I think can be a key information for any hunter in any environment, really, especially in the Midwest when you get out to states like Kansas or Iowa, or where you've got a lot of fence rows and ditches and crop fields and whatever. When they do find that hot doe, most often it's been my experience, and I want you to weigh in on this too. It's been my experience that they will find her and they will take her to the most obscure, weird. Yep. Like there should not be a deer there. Why is there deer in there? Well, you got to think of it from a whitetail's perspective. If they've got a hot doe and they just hit the jackpot earlier than anybody else, they don't want her in high traffic areas. They don't want her in where other bucks can come in and challenge the dominance thing. They want to take her out there where no deer should be, because then they don't run the risk, right?
Yep.
And I think you and I have seen that in the past multiple times. We've come across that. Probably the most recent one that rings into my mind would have been Sundown a couple of years ago when we were sitting in the Bob Marley blind up top there in the banks, and we saw Sundown literally take a doe into a finger of timber that I don't think we've ever seen a deer
ever
go in.
The gar hole.
Yeah, I mean it's literally the gar hole, but that gar hole this time of year can be a damn deadly place to be.
I agree, and as much as the rut is chaos, in my opinion, I don't think the bucks want the chaos. I think once he finds her, like yesterday, we were driving out of the farm and we saw that doe bedded right behind the house, behind a house that was a neighboring house. And we were talking about, that's the spot. There could have been a buck right there. We just couldn't see him. We could barely see the doe.
Yep.
And that's the spot. He's going to take him, and he doesn't want that chaos. He wants her by. He doesn't want to have to go out there and fight other bucks off.
No.
Nope.
absolutely not.
You don't want to go to the bar and fight off other dudes for women, do you?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean,
So-
that's exactly the way it is. No, I agree 100%. And I think, that's just a tip for anybody out there that might be listening, that, like, if you ever find yourself looking in the, out in the field, or you're driving down the road or whatever the hell it is, and you look and you see a deer in a spot that you would traditionally never see deer, you might want to start looking around a little harder and a little deeper, because it's highly likely that there could be a buck out there with a doe. And those, I know those are tough spots to hang in sometimes, because you're like, dude, I'm out here in no man's land. This is going to be a terrible sit. I'm not going to see anything, whatever it is. Well, oftentimes that can be the most deadly spot there is this time of year. A month ago, you just sat there and twiddled your thumbs. A month from now, you're probably going to sit there and twiddle your thumbs. But I think those areas are key in the beginning stages, right, where we're at kind of right now in the rut, where the early does, 1, 2, 3, whatever it might be, start to popping into heat. Now, as the rut progresses, I think that all goes to hell in a handbag, because more does come into heat, and then it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Then it's like, well, I guess now we're in general population, and here we go.
Not to say it wouldn't happen, because it still will happen, but more than likely is going to happen more earlier on in the rut.
Yep, I think the same. So, let's move on past the early does, and let's move into, times they are changing. All of a sudden, everything's getting right. The moon's right. The temperature's right. Not that those things are ever going to stop the rut from happening, but, all the stars line up and everything starts to feel right. The amount of daylight shortened dramatically. Everything's going on. And now you got, like I said, you're thrust into the yard general population, and more does start coming into heat every single day. And that's where the intensity and the chase is on. That's where everything begins to just get fired up, and the woods literally can come alive. And I think, for me, I tend to think that early phase, search, seek, whatever you want to call it, you could be looking at 5 days, you could be looking at 10 days. It all depends. And before you hit the real, 10-day to 2-week mass chaos chases on, everything's moving everywhere type phase.
Yep. No, I agree. And I think that the mass chaos is more going to happen probably around the 5th of November, typically, depending on some weather and moon and that kind of thing. But normally I think it's going to happen around the 5th to the 15th, somewhere right around in there. And that depending on regions, too, because in Kansas, the 15th through the 25th of November is like, that's when it's like hot for us.
And that's what we found. No matter what the weather, no matter what the moon, no matter what anything, it seems to kind of fall in that window. It seems much later out there than anything. And that could be, that could have to do with just population. That could have to do with how the deer are spread out there versus how they are like here in Ohio, where they're kind of on top of one another. It's the more time they spend alone, the less time they have to get fired up, maybe. I don't know. I've thought about that a million times, and I don't have all the right answers. I certainly have theories, but, I'll save those for another day. So you got that real, you move from, the seeking and search phase into the actual chases on phase. And that chase phase to me is like a 10-day to 2-week, Now, anywhere in that chase phase, they can find the hot does, and they can take them to those obscure locations, or they could breed them right there on the spot, ditch them, and be done. And I think, to me, this is kind of one of my second favorite time to hunt, I think, because I feel like during this particular phase, you still have a chance. They're not in full lockdown mode where they've got that doe right on her side. They are still chasing them around, looking for them. They might not have found them yet. So you still have an opportunity. And it's not that you don't in the upcoming phase of like lockdown, but I think your chances are much better right now.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And that's the thing I like about that phase is if you can catch a deer. Because you're at the mercy of the does at the most part. But if you can catch a deer between does, like we did with the Hambino, it's deadly. Yeah. It is. We caught him we saw him that morning with a hot doe. He went and bred her. Guaranteed he went and bred her, because when we shot him, he was by himself. His doe walked by before him.
All ruffled up.
You could tell it was her. And then he walked by, and he was just on the prowl again. He's probably going to go check his scrapes that he's been, his signposts and everything, and just, start downwind checking of, bedding areas. And we just happen to be right there. And that's when the biggest deer are out midday cruising everywhere. Vulnerable.
Yep. I go back to strong arm as well. That's how we killed strong arm.
Yep.
He was with a doe, and we watched him, I don't know, a couple hundred yards there all morning. And, he was chasing every other buck out of there that was trying to get in there, and it was just he was on lockdown with her, and then he bred her, and then he moved on.
And that happened within like a 8-hour time frame for both of them, really,
Yep, it can be that quick. A lot of times when they get them bred, and then they know, okay, that's done. Now I got to go on to the next one. I mean, this is a biological thing for them. Like, this is we have to get this done. So So that's, obviously, in my opinion, probably the most exciting time to be in the woods. And then that moves on to, as you get into the latter stages, the third or whatever stage you want to call it of lockdown, which is there's so many does in heat. The bucks, they don't have to roam as much. They don't have to search as much. They find them, they get with them, and then they're with them for, you hear lots of different things. I've seen them, up to 48 hours with the same deer in the same damn spot,
That's what I just witnessed. I mean, this one was 30, I think he was like 35 hours with her in an 80 yard by 80 yard, little section, never left it,
Yep, and that lockdown, oftentimes, that's just a hard, when they're not moving, it's tough. You know what I mean? It's really tough. Again, and I think, part of our strategy, or anybody out there really, again, just a tip or tactic for this time of year, part of that strategy is go back to those obscure spots, go back to those spots where you could think like, man, there's a big buck in the area, and if he does get a hot doe, he might bring her here, or she might bring him here because they want to be away from everything else. So this is kind of that time where those obscure spots can be valuable again.
Yep. And to further that point, I would say if you have a big primary scrape, start hunting that again, because with it he might be locked down with her for 20, 25, 30, maybe even 40 hours, but if you hit that, he's going to come back to that scrape.
That's right.
When he leaves, he's going to go check for the next doe that used that scrape for a signpost. He's going to come in there and pee in that.
Yep.
And he's going to find her. So go back to scrapes as well.
They're always going to go back to the well.
Yep.
Whether it's in daylight or not, who knows?
Their body tells them they have to.
Yep, but they're always going to go back to the well. So, you really get that lockdown phase, and then it can trickle out, and you can get, some activity for the upcoming, call it 10 days. It's kind of like it's a series of ebbs and flows,
It is
the rut. And there's different tactics for each phase. And that's what I think I'm hoping to get into. We're not going to dive into the kind of late rut when some of the early born fawns and everything come in later on. We'll leave that for a different time. We're going to talk about the meat and potatoes heart of the whole thing in these upcoming episodes. But I think that's what we're looking to cover. So what's going on in different areas of the country, real time, boots on the ground right now, like what's happening.
Yep. Let's hit on Ohio real quick. We've been here the last 3 days.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, what's your opinion on where we're at? And
so right now, I think we are in that sweet spot of transitioning out of the initial kind of seek phase and starting to head into the early stages of the chase.
Yep.
I mean, that's just by what we've witnessed since we've been here. The first night that we were out there, think about it. We sat a food plot, which is, it's a great place to sit this time of year, hunt the does. Does come to the plots. Guess who comes behind them to check them out and scent check? I think that's one thing of all the bucks that we've seen thus far. They're checking every single deer that they find, right? So the bucks are on the lookout. The does might not be ready yet, but to me, that's why this is my favorite time to hunt, because the does still have some sense of normalcy to them, which normalcy means predictability.
Yep.
And if you can hunt that predictability or use that to your advantage, the bucks will show.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they are biologically in tune with, I need to go check every doe I can find. So you've got that where there's not a ton of does in yet. The does are still predictable. Hunt those predictable patterns, and you'll hopefully, we could have
killed a slammer.
We could have been done by now. Let's be honest. Most
Yep.
people would have been done by now. But we know what this farm holds, and we have a couple of deer in mind that we're running and gunning for. So
yeah.
So I think that's where we're at right now. And it's beginning to transition into, there's going to be some unpredictability with the does because they're about to get run all over. And we saw that just the other night, a doe that came to the food plot just like she has been for the last couple of weeks or months even, all of a sudden gets chased out of there, and she's half a mile away or a quarter mile away by the time it's all said and done. And that's where that's where you get like, where did that deer come from?
Yep.
What the hell deer is that? I've never seen that deer before. You get a little bit of overlap in that turf. So that's where I think the rut is right now. I'd like it to stay where it is right now for a couple more days.
Yes,
if we,
I agree.
You know, we have zero control over that, but to me, the thing that makes it nice is going back to that predictability of the does. Use that to your advantage. The bucks are going to show and check.
I agree. Yeah.
So
I guess the last thing I have before we wrap this up is I was actually submitted a question on Instagram, direct message from Alex Holmet. And I want to shout out to Alex. Thank you for submitting a question.
Yep.
But he had a scenario that happened to him. He's from Michigan. He had a scenario that happened to him. It would have been yesterday morning. So today's November 1st. So it would have been, I believe, it was October 31st morning.
Yep.
So he had bucks chasing around his stand. Couldn't see them. They're in the thicket.
Yep.
So he had some deep growl grunts coming from there, and he couldn't see the deer. So his question was, can you discern the size or the age of the deer from how deep the grunt is or isn't? And it's funny that he asked this because later that day you and I had a scenario that I would have said you're stupid.
His question is timely and dead on.
Yes.
I will say that up until yesterday, I probably would have said or I would think so.
Yep. I agree.
And then yesterday proved me wrong, which goes, you've heard me say this 1,000 times. Just when you think you know everything about whitetails,
you know nothing.
And hunting, realize you know nothing.
Yep.
Right? We've been in this game a long time. And yesterday changed my mind and opinion completely. So I've heard over the years, whether it was guiding or hunting on my own or doing whatever, I've heard a ton of growls, and what I mean by growl, for those of you that might not have heard it, is it sounds like a red stag. It sounds like it's literally a growl, a roar. It's just a
yep.
And that's not a chasing grunt or a tending grunt. That is a straight up like, let's do this.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like that is
I'm
like
ready.
It's crazy. So every time that I've ever heard that in the past, it has been visually a dominant mature deer.
Yes.
Right? Maybe not the biggest deer in the woods, but it's always been a visually dominant and mature deer. Yesterday, that all got thrown to the wind because I'll just kind of set the stage. So AB and I hung a new set yesterday morning. We're calling it aptly named Stampede because as we were hanging the set, we were covered in deer. I mean, it was insane in there. 2 different shooters went by, a ton of other deer. I mean, it was just, and we're talking not like at a distance.
Like 80 yards and in, just milling around, feeding.
Everywhere.
Running around.
Everywhere in there. It was crazy. And I'm halfway up the tree trying to put the Millennium sticks in the tree. And, I'm literally doing the old one-arm hang for dear life, just trying to stay still to let the deer get by us. I mean, it was one of those deals. So, long story short, we get that stand in the tree. We go back yesterday afternoon to sit the stand. One buck comes in straight to the tree early on, right at us. I mean, it would have worked. It would have been great. Wrong deer. He goes on his merry way. I popped a squat. I'm like, I'm going to sit down for a little bit. So I sit down, and within a few minutes, I heard the most hellacious roar, growl, lion sound that I've ever heard in the woods, and I've heard a lot of them.
It scared me.
It did. I mean, it was like, whoa. And it was so loud and so intense and so close. I stood up as quickly as I could, grabbed my bow, and I think my words were, holy, get ready, something's coming.
Yep.
I mean, in my opinion, the Covidian was going to walk in front of us, and that was it. We were done. Like, it was game over.
We're chasing a deer named we call him the COVID-10, but we like to call him the Covidian.
Yeah, the great Covidian. I mean, that's what I was expecting. Is here he comes. Like, this is it. Here he's going to walk right through. Yep. Here he's going to chase this doe, and this is going to happen. So I see the doe come flying out, and she's probably 65, 70 yards from us. I see her come flying out, tail tucked, scoots around the corner, like a dog when they tuck their tail. She kind of scooted around there, and I'm like, yep, here he comes. And then this deer stepped out. I was like,
inferior deer.
I'm like, huh? Like that thing? I mean, it first off, it immediately took the wind right out of my sails. Mm-hmm. I mean, I actually had the bow. I just let the bow go. I'm like, oh, that's.
I even said there's got to be another deer.
Yeah,
there's got to be another buck out there.
Yeah. So this deer, listen, he wasn't a bad deer. He wasn't an old dominant deer though, not by any stretch of the imagination.
2 or 3 year old.
Yeah,
probably.
Yeah. I mean, I would say at most 3.
Yeah.
But he sounded like he was 103.
Yeah.
And he sounded like he was going to be a 750-pound whitetail. Like, it was just, it literally sucked the wind out of my sails. And at that moment, we talked about it in the tree of anytime we've ever heard or seen that in the past, it's always been a big mature deer.
Mature deer.
Yep. And
doesn't have to be antler size, like big, but like you said, mature. He's older,
Right.
4, 5, 6, 7-year-old deer.
Yep. So, I don't want to let the wind out of anybody else's sails, but that was our personal experience that went down in the field yesterday. And it just shed new light on, deer are vocal this time of year, and any deer can make any sound. So, much like looking at a rub, oftentimes when guys look at rubs, if it's a big rub, they're like, man, that's got to be a giant. What I found over the years is, I don't know, small deer, young deer will make big rubs too sometimes.
Yep.
So it just, you never know. They're vocal creatures right now. I would love to tell you, like, yeah, that's the one you're after, stick on them, and, you're going to get him. I would pay attention to everything else instead. If you feel like you're on the X, you feel like you're in the right spot, you feel like you're dialed for multiple reasons, then stick with it, because chances are you're going to get a crack at him. Just because you heard an unbelievably hellacious growl off in the thicket doesn't necessarily mean
Yeah, and I would definitely, in the scenario that he's probably in, I would definitely read the room. I like to call it read the room, too.
Yeah.
What's going on, like what deer are chasing, what deer are seeking.
Yep.
Are they a lot of little bucks? I mean, little 1.5, 2.5-year-old deer. And if you got a lot of chaos going on, not saying that it wasn't an old deer, but just read the room, read what you have, and if you think the bigger deer are up chasing and moving, I mean, maybe it was a bigger, older deer. So
Yep. Yeah, that's what it comes down to. So I wish I was able to help out. Unfortunately, that was our experience, and our world got flipped upside down a little bit yesterday, and it is what it is. So I think that's it, man. The goal for these upcoming episodes that we're going to be cutting of this is short and sweet. The next episodes we cut, we're going to bring you way more information of what's happening around the country. So we're going to be talking to people from all the different Midwestern states. If you want to jump on the HUMANIMAL podcast and shoot the bull with us, hit us up. I mean, get over to the social media stuff, the Instagram. You probably know the addresses better than I do.
Yeah, go to Instagram, and I think it's Keefer Brothers HUMANIMAL. Probably said that wrong. Let me look real quick. But just go there and DM us, or even like Casey directly or me directly. So if you go to Instagram, it's KeeferBros_HUMANIMAL. Just DM us and say, hey, I want to jump on. And literally it'll be a 10, 15, 20 minute at the most podcast talking about your region and what's going on.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to everybody for an hour about what they're seeing and what's happening. But this is more quick hit. Let's get in, let's get out. Let's let everybody across the country know where the rut stands in certain areas. That way it's useful to as many people as humanly possible. So that's going to be it for this episode of the HUMANIMAL podcast. We appreciate everybody listening. Once again, this episode has been brought to you by Oz Ozone Generators, Reconyx Trail Cameras, and Banks Outdoors. We appreciate everybody listening. We're going to get this thing up and loaded ASAP, and we're going to be coming. What's the plan for the episodes? Every morning we're going to try to have a brand new one up?
Try to do every morning. We're going to record every evening, so either in the morning, it'll be sometime that, today this is going to go up like right away when we get done recording this, and then tomorrow, in the morning to the midday. So look for it then. So.
Cool. So that's the deal, everybody. Appreciate you listening. AB, good to see you. Haven't seen you in a while. Haven't talked to you in a while. Great having you on the podcast.
Yep.
Let's get our shit together and get in the stand. Let's go.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Mama say it's some new day song.